Hi, I'm Paul.
And I'm Tiffany.
To some, we could be called career wizards.
And to others, sometimes we seem like therapists. However, we definitely are not.
But for you, we are the co hosts of the Career Boosters podcast.
We've had lots of conversations about how being able to, provide emotion and kind of authenticity behind a story really helps with connection and, making things memorable and everything like that. And I think having kind of a toolbox to be able to really mold and shape these stories to communicate them in a more effective way is really what I see as the big difference between, last year and this year.
Hello and welcome to the Career Boosters podcast, season 2, episode 29. We finally got that right. Last week was a little incorrect, but that's okay. We move on. So as we sit here, it's the end of April 2025. Tiffany and I get to work with many students who are excited to be done their MBA. One is sitting in this podcast with us today, and maybe they're a little nervous about what's next for them. We see growth, we see transformation, we see journeys being kind of routed backwards and forwards and journeys to be built upon. And at the end of the day, I think what's important to know is careers and our journey of life is not linear. It is not going to go from 1 to 2 to 3. It's going to go to 1 to 10 to 185 and then back to 2. And there is ups and downs. There's navigating these ups and downs and the challenges that sometimes people face. And I think at the end of the day, those are the best stories that we want to talk about. For our guest today, Griffin Mumby, MD MBA student, Griffin's journey has been an interesting and unique one, and one I can't wait to dive into today. I've been Griffin's career coach for the last 10 months, and I've got to learn and see an exponential amount of growth, a real deep dive into introspection, and a real joy seeing what the journey is like and seeing hard work pay off. So, Griffin, thank you so much for joining us, and we're going to jump right into the first question. So, what's the story behind your decision to embark into an MBA?
Well, thank you both for having me. It's a real honor to be here and looking forward to our conversation today. I think for me, the NBA was a bit of a whirlwind leading up to it, a little bit of happenstance as well. Growing up, was a big hockey player, spent lots of time practicing in the garage, and ultimately that took me away from home when I was about 16 years old. And I think playing junior hockey, seeing the impact of concussion as I was kind of transitioning into more of an academic role, really helped me appreciate, neuroscience and got me interested in the brain. Which then later transitioned into medical school and the MD program. Um, for me, I was finishing my last year of the MD program last about this time last year actually, and was going through the residency matching process. And I had my sights set on a field called physiatry or physical medicine and rehab. And it's kind of an amalgamation of musculoskeletal and neurologic medicine. And the goal is really to help people with their function and quality of life. And it's a small specialty, not very well known, only about 30 spots in the country. And, unfortunately, things didn't quite go how I hoped and didn't end up finding a spot in the matching process. And so for me, I was kind of looking at what opportunities were out there. And, I was chatting with some people that had done the MD, MBA in the past and just had nothing but great things to say about it. And, I think hearing their stories, being able to, grow my area or my knowledge in areas of business and really be able to work on kind of my communication, teamwork, and leadership skills were all really exciting opportunities, and ultimately was what drove me to the MBA program.
And you've shared that with us in a few different ways through this kind of, you didn't kind of plan to be here, but life happens and here you are. And you just talked again, not really going according to plan. And I think I'll speak for myself, but I know Paul's shared, his life hasn't always gone to plan. I don't think life ever does, but looking back at times in when my life hasn't, I actually wonder if my life did go according to plan. And that's kind of what I've heard from you the few times that you've talked about this is it wasn't expected, but what you've gotten out of this last year has been, significant. And I'm looking forward to hearing you share that again. But that whole not according to plan, maybe it actually is according to a plan, which is kind of cool. The MBA journey is often a surprise for everybody, but I'm always curious to hear what surprises come from it because everybody's surprised by different things. I think it's table stakes. You all know it's going to be a heavy workload, right? Like, not a shocker. That you all know there's a lot of group work. Like, there's just some stuff that nobody's shocked by. I'm curious to hear what were you surprised by over this last year of your MBA journey?
Yeah, I think for me, like as you mentioned, it's a heavy course load, especially having to, get through everything in a year. But that being said, I think the biggest thing for me really has been the amount of growth and really taking the time to be able to kind of invest in myself and come from a place where I think of this time last year where, it was a lot of disappointment, a lot of challenge. You're seeing your colleagues move on to kind of the next step in their careers and, for a period of time kind of feeling a little lost and, unsure of what the future might hold. And then being able to reflect on the year and being able to not only have a better understanding of myself, but be able to communicate that and then, work towards ultimately the goal that I'd hoped to achieve. And thankfully, matching to my program of choice and importantly too, being able to stay, here in Edmonton, close to my family, close to my friends, my support system. And so, yeah, I think really being able to take that time to kind of invest and just see, how much growth and how far I've come from this point in time last year has been, a really great surprise and, really
Cool.
happy to see.
So awesome. You have two choices when things don't go your way. You can lean into something different and unique, and that's what you did, or you could lean out. You could just be disgruntled at the world, right? You could just be like, ah, gosh, like what's going on? Why all of these challenges? And Griffin, we walked you through. You showed up in August of last year for orientation. I'm sure a bit overwhelmed, and you're sitting with this group of wholly international kind of people from all around the world in different specialties, different disciplines, things like that. And one of the things that we took you through in the first bit of our programming with MBA students is all around strengths. And so understanding your strengths is a part of just real, like I look at it, maybe not the foundational piece, but really the piece that like really allows people to understand what differentiates them. And they're a big part of the first year programming. What did you learn about yourself when it came to your strengths and maybe even areas of growth or improvement upon?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, Paul, when we've had our meetings, we've joked that coming in, you have a general sense of kind of maybe what you're good at, maybe what you're not so good at, what you need to work on. But I think being able to go through, the exercises through Biz 501, being able to go through the various assessments that we do, and really being able to kind of name and understand what those look like, I think is the first step. And for me, a lot of my strengths came around, my ability to relate and kind of connect with others. And I think, whether it's through an ability to listen, understand kind of people's needs or, what they're looking for in certain situations, I think being able to use those skills, identify them, and continue to work on them has been, a really good learning experience. That being said, it's something I think I do quite well at in one-on-one and smaller group situations, but admittedly, I was a bit more of a reserved type of person. Those kind of larger group settings are overwhelming and find myself kind of going back into my shell a little bit. And so I think it's been a really good opportunity through the teamwork involved in the courses, through being able to communicate in front of larger audiences through the presentations, where I've been able to kind of push myself out of my comfort zone and be able to take some of those skills that I'm able to harness in those smaller group settings and kind of build on them in those bigger, audiences and group settings as well. So, yeah, it's been a good learning experience and, continuing to kind of work on it here each and every day.
Mm. Something that I've been really impressed by with you, and so you and I don't connect as often. I'm not your career coach, and so our intersections are a bit different. But I pay attention to the world of communication, public speakers. I follow a lot of people. It fascinates me what makes a really great, engaging speaker. And so that doesn't mean necessarily on a stage, one on one. We've taken you through interviews, writing, I've experienced your ability to communicate in a few different modes and methods. And you, whether you know it or not, you follow some really great best practices of communication. And you did it just again today when you gave us a little bit of a spiel of yourself at the beginning. You've got some of these messages that I have to assume came from prepping for your CARMS process, which we'll go through in just a second, that it had to come from that. But when we can figure out our own key messages and then figure out how to keep kind of telling them is situationally appropriate, contextually appropriate. But I've heard some of your key messages now multiple times, and you do it in such an authentic way. I don't think you realize that that is like the hallmark of a brilliant communicator. And so, like, hang on to that. But that leads me to what changed? You went through the process last year to match, unsuccessful. You got this opportunity in the MBA to learn about yourself. Now you were successful. What was it about this last year? What tactically felt different for you between those two experiences?
I appreciate that. Thank you. I think for me, prior to coming to the MBA, when I told stories or shared experiences, it was largely around kind of the what and, this is what happened, and just kind of leaving it at that. And I think through, learning about myself, having a better understanding, I feel like I've kind of built up a bit more of a toolbox and being able to pull from different areas and be able to really contextualize a lot of these different experiences. I think, we've had lots of conversations about how being able to, provide emotion and kind of authenticity behind a story really helps with connection and, making things memorable and everything like that. And I think having kind of a toolbox to be able to really mold and shape these stories to communicate them in a more effective way is really what I see as the big difference between last year and this year. And I think too having that to pull from through experiences and interviews where you don't know what to expect adds a level of confidence and maybe an ability to regain a bit of control and otherwise what feels like a lot of or a very unpredictable and uncertain situation.
Hmm. We've had a few guests on our program that talk about what CARMS is. So I'd love for you to kind of just refresh us. What is CARMS? Like how does this all work? And then let's journey into 2025 CARMS. What was preparation like? What was that lead up like for you? So a little explanation on what CARMS is, and then what was prep like for you?
Yeah. So CARMS, it's the Canadian Residency Matching System. Basically, every Canadian medical student in their graduating year applies to a portal, which is kind of a network of all the various programs, not only across specialties, but also across the country. And so you have thousands of students each year where you're preparing your, resumes, your letters of intent, along with a whole host of other documents and kind of submit it out into the world. And so usually that process starts around September, October, and goes until the end of November. And then over the December and kind of holiday break, you learn about interview offers. And then in January, certainly ever since COVID, it's been online. It's kind of this 3 week whirlwind where, interviews come from all over the place. It could be, interviewing for Specialty X in Halifax one morning, Specialty Y in Vancouver later that afternoon. And so, yeah, it's just kind of a whole whirlwind. And then following the interview process, programs submit a rank list, applicants submit a rank list, and they use this algorithm to match everyone together and hope everyone ends up finding a spot and learns about all those results come March. So it's a long process. It's quite involved, and as I mentioned, a lot of kind of uncertainty and unpredictability with it as well. In terms of the preparation, I think it certainly helped having gone through it once before. You have a level of understanding as to what to expect. But I think for me, maybe a bit more passive preparation started, really as soon as we kind of got into the MBA program, and especially with a lot of the work we did with the two of you and Biz 501. I think being able to, start to develop that toolbox, like I mentioned, and gain that understanding of self was really important. And then, as you get deeper into the fall, come October, you're really honing those, application letters, your documents, um, and then starting to transition into interview practice. And as I mentioned, I think just having, the understanding and different kind of experiences and uh, things like that to draw on really helped with the prep this year.
You just said a term that I think I'm going to steal. I don't know. I think Paul and I maybe need to use in coming years of passive preparation. We always think about if we're talking interviews specifically, which is kind of the CARMS process, right? We think wrongly that preparation comes kind of once you get the notification that an interview is coming, right? And you already had that notification. You knew when it was coming, but you chose to allow yourself the time to more passively prep, to absorb, to think, to like soak in stuff. That passive prep, I think, truly separates people from, nailing it and not truly. And it's more work, it's a longer time frame, and it's more uncomfortable. So people are a lot more willing to skip it. So good on you, and thanks for the term. I think I'm gonna steal that. You've talked about storytelling a lot. We've talked about you being a good storyteller. Tell us a little bit about how that relates to medicine. Sure, CARMs and stories in this interview process is, I think, a bit different than storytelling in more traditional corporate type of settings. But why is storytelling important to you, and what have you learned from it, kind of in this world of medicine?
Yeah, I mean, I think as you mentioned, certainly in the interview process, being able to provide some context, some emotion behind, your experiences, and really being able to communicate is something that, is I think done best through stories. But I think, like I said, being able to add that layer of authenticity, um, in medicine in particular, and especially physiatry, where that therapeutic kind of patient physician relationship is so important. And I think being able to come across as your authentic self and um, be really helps you to connect and build those relationships with people. I think being able to tell a good story, people are able to relate, kind of see themselves in maybe a similar situation. And so I think it really just opens the door to develop those really important relationships and continue to build them from there.
We continually talk. We talk about it in interviews. We talk about it in just the knowing yourself. Understanding how to tell a story is so important. It is, and it's not something that like this, right? It's you have to practice it. You have to go through the I call it like a vending machine of stories. We need to build our stories, but we need to understand those stories, right? What was the situation? What were the actions that we took? What happened in the middle? And then what was the result? I think, too many people tell a story and then don't tell us what happened at the end. It's like watching a movie and then you don't get the last half an hour of the movie. And I know you and I, Griffin, worked a ton on like the storytelling pieces and just connecting the stories to the right questions, right? And
Yeah.
understanding those stories. And man, it's so life changing when you get an understanding of how to change and or how to tell stories and how to do those things. So that's really cool. You took a year to recalibrate, strengthen yourself, kind of do those kinds of things. Any big takeaways for yourself that you'd like to share?
I mean, I think for me, kind of the biggest takeaway is, across all the assessments we did, I think there is a few common themes. And one of the biggest one, I think, was really, being able to relate to others and build those kind of relationships and connections and things of that nature. And I think being able to piece kind of, all these different aspects of myself together, you realize that there's a real joy in helping people and seeing people succeed and kind of a real giving nature. On the flip side, that comes at a cost. And I realize that, for me, assertiveness isn't always something that I'm great at, and being able to speak up for myself, in difficult situations is something that's been a challenge. And so I think in looking at the strengths and also looking at kind of maybe some of the limitations and things of that nature, I think it's been, really impactful to kind of mindfully and purposefully work on bringing a bit more balance. I think it's easy to kind of give and give and give, and then you end up running yourself dry and burning out. And so I think really trying to strike that balance and be able to manage both sides of the coin is something that is probably my biggest takeaway from this past year.
And I appreciate that, like, few layers down understanding of strengths. And I heard emotional intelligence in there as well, because we certainly talk about it. It's one thing to understand it on the surface, it's a whole other thing to understand what happens when it's overdone, what happens when there's not near enough of it, what happens when it's not balanced with other things. And that is, you have to be willing to peel back that onion and figure that out kind of for yourself and how it applies. So, like, well done for you for having done that. I have heard you reframe this kind of year of, I don't want to say pause because you certainly grew, but it was a bit of a pause in your medical trajectory for sure.
Mhm.
And I have to imagine that it felt like a setback at the beginning. So, advice, you've been there, you felt that. For someone who is solidly sitting in that, this feels like a setback perspective, what advice do you have for them?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, it's okay to, for lack of better terms, embrace the suck. Like, there's no question it was a setback and it was disappointing. And I think in order to kind of build yourself back up, dust yourself off, you really do need to, just kind of embrace the grieving process, lean on your support system, and take the time to kind of accept the circumstances. From there, I think once you're able to come to a better understanding, you're much better able to work forward and continue pursuing that goal. I think for me, I look back to even my hockey career, and um, I had left home at 16 to play in the Western Hockey League, and after 2 years, I realized that what, this isn't for me. I had difficulties being away from my family, and so I made the hard decision to end up leaving and pursue an opportunity that brought me closer to home. I think at the time it certainly felt like a failure, with a lot of the hockey culture around, um, you know, suck it up, keep pushing. You do whatever you can to, support the team. Like, I felt like I was letting a lot of people down, but ultimately that decision led to, a number of great opportunities that I otherwise wouldn't have had. Had the opportunity to play in a national junior A championship in my last year, represent Team Canada at the World Junior A Challenge, and so I think despite the disappointment and difficulties around facing adversity and facing these setbacks, I think some of the best opportunities and lessons and chances to grow can come from them. And that's an example in sport. We've seen it now through a professional lens as well. So
Mhm.
yeah, I think that's the message I would leave.
Can I underline something before you go to the last question, Paul? You said a word in there, Griffin, that's come up a lot for me in coaching people who are finishing. So just like yourself, you're done the MBA. And there is, I think, a lack of appreciation for the grieving process that happens as you leave an MBA.
Mhm.
And you just talked about a few grieving processes as things change or don't going to plan. But if anybody's listening to this that is either kind of just graduating the MBA or maybe that's going to be you next year, it's a grieving process. And
Mhm.
there is those types of emotions that deserve to be embraced, just like you said, kind of
Yeah.
embrace the suck. And people don't talk about it. So I wanted to highlight
Mhm.
that.
Yeah, thanks, Tiffany. And I think it's just so important. Like, life is filled of these ups and downs. We have high moments of like, yay, I'm finished my last finance exam. Thank God I don't ever have to do that again. But then it's like, oh boy, like, real life is going to set in, and I'm like, residency's coming up, and I have to work for 24 hours or whatever I have to do as a physiatrist. And I think that at the end of the day, we do have process of emotion and ebbs and flows and things that go along, right? And I guess that's what I was trying to get at the start. It's like, this is life, and you use some great words, Griffin. There's happenstance, there's things that just kind of happen, and choices we make, and that's a wonderful process. So, Griffin, yeah, you and I have had a chance to work together for 10 months. Having a career coach, not everybody can experience what a career coach is and what that kind of means. A lot of people think it's like, hey, this guy's or this person is going to help us with my resume and my cover letter or my CV and help me get a job. What has it been like to work with a career coach?
I think for me, there's a few facets, and I think, yeah, and it's not the I'm going to help you with CVs, I'm going to help you with letters, but I think first having an outside perspective, someone that's able to, work through and understand you from that kind of external and maybe a bit more objective perspective has been quite valuable. And I think one thing that I really appreciate working with you, Paul, is you didn't really hand me anything on a silver platter. I think it's easy to kind of accept people's advice and kind of take their word and run with it. And I think one thing that admittedly at times was challenging and maybe a bit frustrating, but you would pose questions and challenge me and kind of force me to think and reflect. And that was something that, I really appreciate because I think that's where you get the most value. If you don't put the time in, I don't think there's that kind of value. And so for that, we'll say this in a public forum. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Aw, I was hoping you'd get even more flowery and I know it's not your style, Griffin, but that would just be a moment to be able to make Paul uncomfortable. I appreciate the discomfort that you noted, though, because it is a common occurrence with students. Because we have the title career coach, it's expected that we will like spew out career advice and what career you should do. And we don't. However, we also respect that's sometimes frustrating. But I really enjoy that you, at this point, having gone through that, can look back and go, "Oh yeah, okay, that's where I've grown." We could probably chat for a while, actually. There's lots interesting about you, Griffin, but I think it's time for a lightning round. You ready? All right.
Absolutely.
Three quick questions, three gut answers. What part of your career story has given you the biggest boost so far?
I think for me, it's the resiliency. Certainly faced a lot of adversity, setbacks, and I think being able to just kind of push through is something that I'm proudest of.
What do you wish you'd learned sooner?
Be present. I think it's easy to look ahead, always worry about what's next, but then you end up missing out on what's happening right in front of you. And so I think that's something I'm continually working on and trying to be better at.
Hmm. And service is something that just is so natural to Paul and I, so we always like to ask and see how it's going to show up for you in the coming week.
Yeah, so my best friend from home, he's getting married in September, and he's asked me to be his best man. And so I've been working on kind of planning his bachelor party and getting all that organized, and we'll see it come to fruition here in the next week. So looking forward to that and seeing how all the work comes together.
Oh, fun. I bet it'll be great. Paul's random question. What do you got?
Griffin, there are some people I'm worried about. Oh my gosh, am I going to have a question ready for them? I could ask you like 100, so I think I'm good with Griffin because know you pretty well. The first thing I want to just say though, Griffin matched with his number one choice in CARMS. I think it's okay for me to say that. If not, I'll cut this out. But I think it's really exciting to know that success came at the end of a squiggly journey that Tiffany likes to call it. So my random question, Griffin. A lot of kids grow up. A lot of kids grow up playing sports. A lot of kids grow up doing all these kinds of activities. But I want to ask you a question about sports and growing up. What was kind of the biggest lesson learned from playing sports and being successful at a young age? What was a great lesson learned?
You know what? It's going to sound a little cliche, and um, but I think for me, it's the work you put in is ultimately pay off and kind of how successful you are. And I mean, that being said, I've been really fortunate to have an incredible support system. My parents gave up a ton to allow me the privilege to play. I had some incredible mentors, but I was never the most talented. I was never the most skilled. And I think one thing or piece of feedback that I often received was around my work ethic and willingness to, you know, work hard. So I think that would be my biggest piece of advice. And certainly when you love something, you enjoy it, makes it a lot easier. So find something you're passionate about, work hard at it, and good things will come.
Brilliant advice. And there's research around the success of people doesn't come from being brilliant at something when you're young. It, in fact, comes from the opposite. The people who figure out at a young age that discipline and consistency, right? James Clear's work, grit, Angela Duckworth, all of that stuff. There's science behind it that makes successful people, and you are proving that just in how you've then dealt with the rest of life that showed up. Griffin, I really appreciate, I'm going to use your word, you used it a few times, your authenticity, but I appreciate it in a very specific way. Yes, you show up as you every time I've ever experienced you, but you have been willing this year from the start to talk about something that is uncomfortable, a setback. You could deem it a failure. Yes, you've reframed it, but you didn't have to. You didn't have to use that as part of your story. You didn't have to help others learn through that part of your story. It'd be just as easy to sweep something like that under the rug and, learn from it quietly. But that's not what I've seen you do. And the ripple impact that makes on others is significant. And it's impacted both Paul and I. You've been a joy to be around, to have in our classes, to coach. And you are someone that is really easy to point to prove that hard work and the right mindset truly, truly makes a massive impact when you let it. So thank you for sharing that in this podcast this past year. And I just can't wait to see where you take your life from here. So thank you.
I appreciate that. Thank you. I think it's important to, own things and, like I said, accept the circumstances. And, uh, I think I owe a lot of it to, the support and mentorship that I've received throughout the program and, a lot of great classmates as well. So I feel very, very grateful for, the experiences I've had, but I think more importantly, the people I've come across and the relationships I've built. So yeah, I appreciate the kind words, but I think, as a cliche goes, it takes a village and feel very fortunate to have had that helping me along the way.
It does. Well, this village is wishing you all the very best and keep in touch.
Thank you.
All right. So my key takeaway I highlighted already, but I'm going to like double underline it, I suppose. And I think we're going to now carry it through. But this passive prep idea, and it works for more than just interviews and what we were talking about, that preparation for stuff happens far before the actual thing, or it can if you choose to do so. But you have to, and I'm going to work in another key takeaway that I loved of his, that you kind of have to embrace the suck of prepping far before you have to in an area that you probably don't want to. It's uncomfortable. Self-reflection isn't always easy or natural, but true preparation comes long before you sit in front of an interview, someone networking. And I think that's the biggest realization that we have when students come to us and go, "Oh no, I'm not as prepared as I thought."
Mhm.
And we have the ability to say, "We've talked about this for a little while." Versus students that sit down and go, I'm ready. And you know that they've been passive prepping for a
Mhm.
long time. There's a big difference. So I
Yeah.
really wanted to underline that because it's so important and often
Mhm.
missed. I don't know. You, Paul?
Yeah, I think that's really awesome. And typically I'm the one that has more than one key takeaway, but you
I know,
did that
right?
today,
I
which I
tried.
think is totally perfect. I totally agree. I'm going to come back to something, and I feel like this is going to be a key takeaway for many, many episodes, but the word or the phrase know thyself,
Hmm.
understanding and learning and understanding who you are, what you're good at, what areas of growth and improvement could look at. The thing I took away from Griffin, he talked about being a relator and being somebody that relates really well with others, but more like in small
Hmm.
groups and that's awesome. Like at least he understands that about himself and the know thyself, right? If you want to be surrounded by many people, surround yourself by many
Cool.
people and do what works for you. Um, we are all different and humans are just different and we if the more we know ourselves the better we can kind of aim our trajectory and kind of go for it.
Hmm.
So,
Yeah, it's goodness, so important and a lifelong
mhm.
journey. Like I don't that
Yeah,
we'll be talking about this until we're done podcasting, whenever the
yeah.
heck that is. So
I'm old as stink, and I still like try to
still,
learn more
uh-huh.
about myself as you go along, right? So, yeah.
Totally. I think we're going to keep with the theme of transformation as
Mhm.
we have students that are exiting the program who have truly transformed themselves in the last year or two. And so we've got another one up who has very much so transitioned themselves in the last 2 years as an international student. So can't wait to hear about it. and we will see you next week. Thanks for tuning in to the Career Boosters podcast. We hope you had a blast. Yeah, we know that's corny. Catch you next time, and remember to subscribe wherever you enjoy podcasts.